fireside chat.
Okay. And he's just going to kill it, right? I don't have to turn it off or anything.
He's going to kill it.
Okay. If we can bring ourselves back together, I know that was sort of a short break, but we'd like to say somewhat on schedule. We have a little fudge room in the schedule, but I'd like to invite you all to finish up filling your coffee, grabbing a donut or whatever is over there on the counter I haven't even seen, and then take your seats again. My name is Bill Moen. I'm in the College of Information. Wear a couple of hats. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Library and Information Sciences. I also serve as the Associate Dean for Research within the college and Director of Texas Center for Digital Knowledge, which is a research and development center looking at digital information and digital technologies. I'm so excited by the breadth of topics that we have today. Before I introduce our next speaker, Mike Conlon, I just want to give you kind of a little preview of what's going to happen here. We will have one more speaker this morning, and then at lunchtime, we have inserted a half-hour presentation by Mark Phillips. We realize that having all these wonderful people from the outside doing wonderful presentations about things that are really important, we sort of overlooked the important stuff that's happening here. And so Mark made a comment to me a couple weeks ago. I said, oh, you're right. So anyway, he's going to give a quick 30-minute overview of some of the digital library work and the institutional repository that has been established here. I'm very excited by that. And then we will have lunch here. Lunch is being provided, and you can hang around for about an hour for having lunch and socializing and networking. And then we'll resume the afternoon session. Okay? So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Mike Conlon. He's the Associate Director and Chief Operating Officer of the Clinical and Translation Science Institute at the University of Florida. He's also a Research Associate Professor in Biomedical Informatics at University of Florida. But he's here in the capacity of being the principal investigator for an NIH-funded initiative called VIVO, which is a open source software to be used by institutions to have faculty members describe themselves with the purpose of having researchers connect to researchers. Okay? And it's very exciting to see how open source software can be used in multiple ways, from publishing to communication amongst the researchers, and we'll see other instances with open educational resources this afternoon and managing research data and supporting research teams. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and he'll have about 45 minutes. Afterwards, we're going to do a little bit better job in terms of Q&A. We now have we've got the microphones figured out. So I'll sit over here, and there'll be Shannon probably will have another mic at the end. So we'll have some time for questions and answers. Okay, and Mike, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so right. So I have this VIVO thing that I'm doing, and I've been at the university a long time, and you kind of mature and figure out what your role is, and my role is to fix things. Okay, I try to find broken things and fix them, and try to make things better than I found them, and try to leave things for somebody else to use. That's my role. And so the Clinical and Translational Science Institute, its role is to fix science at UF. VIVO's role is to give us some new capability, a new capability to share information and to connect with each other. And VIVO's an open thing. I get asked, well, if I put this data in VIVO, how do I protect it? And my answer is don't put it in VIVO. VIVO is built to give things away. That's its job. Give it away. Okay? So, I also had my, talk with Google, and I also had and Bing and Yahoo, and people came to me and said, well, wow, you really need to talk to them. And it turned out I didn't need to talk to them because VIVO gives data away. They already have it. They could do whatever they want with it. It's open. Okay? VIVO happens to use a technology that search engines have an affinity for. So we'll talk a little bit about the technology. So at the University of Florida, faculty come to me and they say, what is this VIVO thing? And I say, well, how did you learn about it? And they say, well, I searched for myself at the University of Florida and my VIVO page came up first. Okay? So, and then I have to explain, well, yeah, that's because it's using a particular approach to information that the search engines like. Okay? So I didn't have to negotiate with Google or anything. Okay? They're already using our data, and it already is appearing at the top of search results. So as was mentioned, I'm the principal investigator of an NIH grant. The NIH, that's biomedical science, and I guess it's also sort of like big money. Okay? And they had this ARA thing going on, the Recovery Act, and their job was to stimulate the economy, and I'm trying to help them. Okay? So I got a bunch of NIH money, and I'm trying to spend it on the common good. When we wrote our proposal, they wrote an RFA, and they wanted an open tool for research, discovery, and collaboration. That's fantastic. They brought me the RFA. They said, Mike, take a look at this. It was very exciting. Like, wow, these government people, they wanted us to make something good. And being kind of an NIH guy and having worked in biomedical science for most of my career, I knew that it should be bigger than biomedical science. So we read the RFA very carefully, and then we talked to the program officers and said, you say scientist, but you meant scholar. And they said, whatever, it's going to be an open thing. It's going to be collaborative. Whatever you write your proposal. Whatever it needs to be. And so we were very fluid in the way we wrote the proposal, using the term scientist, faculty member, investigator, scholar interchangeably. Okay, and for people who are strict semantic types, that might have been very offensive. But I think for the readers, they sort of understood where we were going. Okay, we were thinking about creating a large thing. So we do have this when we're in front of the NIH, we always say National Network of Scientists, but it is actually bigger than that, as we'll see. Okay, so it is public, it is structured, and it's linked data. And we'll talk about each of those. That it's public data, it's structured data, so it's not just web pages, it's not just text. Public, structured, and linked data. Okay? About investigators, here we're using the term investigators, could have been scientists, could have been scholar. Interests, activities, accomplishments, and tools. So we're going to talk about the data, and we're going to talk about some tools to advance science scholarship. Okay? So that's a picture, that's a screenshot of VIVO at Cornell. VIVO started at Cornell. There was a piece of software there that they were already using. And the Cornell people and the Florida people had a relationship through the libraries. So our librarians had been working with the Cornell librarians, and it was the University of Florida librarians who came to me, and they said, the NIH, and the NIH wants this, and we think it might be a match for this VIVO thing that Cornell has. And so we put together a collaboration, a consortium, and one of the first things I did was, at that time I was chairing a computational biology group at the university. And I said, well, does this VIVO thing work? And I went over to the VIVO at Cornell, and I typed in computational biology, and this screenshot came up. That's a friend of mine who used to work at the University of Florida, and Cornell hired them. Okay, so I knew this person very well. It was like, yes, he does work in computational biology, and he is at Cornell. That's great. Okay, so interests, activities, and accomplishments. Okay, and public structured linked data. Okay, what kind of data are we interested in? Well, we are interested in lots of different kinds of data. And in this figure, we put the investigator in the middle, and then we're showing linkages between the investigator and various semantic links that they might have to other things that are in the environment. Now, for those of you who are topologically advanced, you might notice that this diagram is completely invertible. That is, all the 5 elements here have all the bidirectional links between those 5 elements, so I could have put anything at the middle. Okay? So I can rearrange this diagram. I could put the resources in the middle. I could put the funding in the middle. Whatever I want. Okay, it's all the same. Okay, this diagram doesn't change depending on what's in the middle. Okay, but investigators like to be in the middle. So here's some connections that investigators might have to other things that are in the world of scholarship. Again, because I come from the biomedical science world, funding is pretty important to us. I don't get to be there unless I have money, and they mean external money. So funding, projects, studies, that's very important. Resources, equipment, and services at the university. So, my institute has core labs, and people want to know, is this person associated with the core lab? Did they use the core lab? Did that core lab participate in the construction of a data set? Or, so core lab construction of a data set. Core lab was important in the production of particular scholarly work. What are the connections between the various elements that constitute scholarship? We take a very open and view of what constitutes scholarly work. I've had the great fortune to be involved in the breadth of our university. So while my particular work happens to be in biomedicine, I took a pretty large stint over in our College of Liberal Arts and Sciences and was working with everything from philosophy to physics and astronomy and zoology, and then met all the people that they were working with in fine arts and all of our other colleges. And so having some kind of view of scholarly work that's large, not just the published paper, and this big idea over here regarding data and data sets and sharing data. VIVO is being designed to represent the connections between the elements of scholarship. Everything in VIVO is recorded as a triple. It is a semantic web application, and what that means is that unlike a traditional data system, and here I'm going to branch over into technology, but it's kind of interesting, at least to me, is that everything in VIVO is expressed in an open ontology in the form of simple triples. Mike published paper. Mike used data set. Mike likes Bill. Okay? Very simple. Everything has a subject, a predicate, and an object. Okay? And the subject, predicate, and object are all defined through a structured ontology so that we know what we're talking about when we say Mike published paper. Okay? What paper? Okay? And then the paper has characteristics. So paper has author list. Paper has date of publication. Paper has journal. Okay? And because of those connections, we can invert things. So if we know that Mike published in journal, we know journal published Mike. Okay? So everything is very symmetric. Okay? And that symmetry has a lot of power, as we will see. Okay? Okay, so everything is a triple. Okay? And every piece of data has an address. Okay? A URL. The subject does, the predicate does, the object does. The predicate does. That's interesting. So when we say Mike published has an address. Published is an element in an ontology, and we can find what published means in the ontology. And is it subclassed in some way? Is there some variant of publishing that we're interested in? Okay? So we can know what we meant with some specificity, in every statement made in VIVO. Okay, so every piece of data has an address. Okay? Controlled vocabularies and ontology. Right? So there is a structure to the data, okay? And we can move up and down that structure. Okay? So if someone is expressing an interest in a particular disciplinary way, and they say, I work in hypertension. Well, you work in hypertension. That's good. That's something to do with cardiology, which is something to do with clinical medicine, which is something to do with healthcare. Okay? And we can move up and down knowledge hierarchies through the use of these controlled vocabularies. So we have partners at Stony Brook who are working on fitting and expressing elements in VIVO to UMLS. And for those of you who are involved in biomedical information representation, UMLS is a collection of the prominent and well used ontologies for representing medical information and health information, and includes specific sub-ontologies regarding lab tests and bacteria and all kinds of things. So, but the point is, if somebody says, I'm interested in hypertension, we want them to be found in a search for cardiology. Okay? And that's difficult to do unless you actually have the information represented, and that you have it in an ontology and you understand hypertension is part of cardiology. Okay? So we're very interested in knowledge representation and expressing the interests of scholars using controlled vocabularies. That idea is pretty well developed in certain disciplinary areas, and we're always interested in how it is being developed in other disciplinary areas. So the use of ontologies is pretty well advanced in biomedical science, and we are learning about ontologies and knowledge representation structures in other disciplines. Okay, so where does the data come from? So VIVO is going to collect data, and it's going to have all this linkage data about faculty and what they do and what they're interested in and who they work with and what they published and what data they used and all of that. It's going to have all those connections in there. Where's all that data going to come from? Okay, so and we know that it's kind of loose in the world. That data is all over the place. Okay, and so. That's probably an understatement. All over the place. It's scattered. It's unstructured. It's in a variety of different things, and it's in the hands of a variety of different stakeholders. Okay? So we're talking about scholars' interests, activities, and accomplishments. Well, what about those activities? And institutions record activities. They know. You taught a course. There was a seminar. Maybe you published a paper and that went into an institutional repository. Maybe they know that you published a paper, but maybe the provost office finds out that you published a paper when you submit your annual review and you put the paper on there. Sooner or later, they know. Okay, that something happened at some level. Okay, they know. Okay. And our job is to get that data and structure it in some way that we can use it. And we can use it to know what's happening, what's going on, what did happen. Okay? Now, having come from the biomedical, with a background in biomedical science, we're pretty interested in what's happening now. Okay? So, I have some, data collection instincts, but I'm also very interested in taking it right to now. Okay, so I want to know, we have University of Florida is really, really big, and we have a terrible problem with internal communication. The thing I want to know, they didn't tell me. Okay, and the thing they did tell me, I didn't want to know. Okay, so the match between my interests and the information that's coming to me is very, very poorly done. They try to use it with a tool that doesn't work for that purpose, called email. Okay, it doesn't work for that purpose. Okay, you cannot send emails to a large collection of people and expect to get a useful result. Okay, that's the wrong tool for the job. Okay, so we want to have some way of getting information to the people who can use it and are interested in it. And so we have colleagues that are working on information routers that can take the interests and activities and accomplishments that people have expressed in their work and in their profiles, and route information to them based on those interests, okay? With a volume knob under the faculty member's control. So they can turn that to 0. I don't want any of that, okay? Or they can turn it up, okay? And we might tell them, hey, you know what? You're in genetics, and this Nobel Prize-winning geneticist is coming. Did you want to know that? Yes, you did. Okay? So, there might be a good fit, or there might not be a fit between the information and the activities. Okay? So we work with the institutions to expose their data. And I guess I'm incredible. This is the University of Florida, by the way, and I'm incredibly blessed that the state of Florida is an open record state. Everything we do as public employees is on display. So I do not have to ask, can I publish your phone number? Okay? That's a matter of public record, okay, as a state employee, okay? So there's a whole bunch of things that are just there, okay? So what course was taught by what faculty member? That's a matter of public record. And the state wants us to display that in the most prominent way possible, okay? So, the registrar is very protective about the super secret things related to FERPA and who got what grade, okay? But in terms of the activity of the faculty, that's a matter of public record, okay? So I go over to the registrar, very well. I say, hey, we're doing this VIVO project. Cool, what's up? And I explain what it is, and he says, okay, here's a data set that contains every course section down right to the meeting, we call it. So there's course, and then we're teaching Economics 101. There's a million sections of Economics 101, and then below that, we actually have another concept called a meeting. And so here's every class meeting of the University of Florida for the last 10 years, and every instructor who taught them. Okay? You can have it. Okay? Put it in there. Okay? And what that does is, so we put that in there. We're putting it in there. So, and by the way, that number was 302,000 course records. Okay? 302,000 courses, okay, that were taught. We put that in there, and then we can invert it. Here are all the people who taught Psych 101 over the last 10 years. You'd be surprised the conversations that start when that data becomes publicly available, instantly clickable, and there isn't any hiding at all. So even though that data was publicly available and it isn't even a Freedom of Information Act thing, it's publicly available data, it wasn't operationally available. People couldn't get to it. Okay? It was somewhere in a registrar system, and if you asked the registrar, he'd be happy to give it to you. But in VIVO, you can click on a page called Psych 101. It'll show you all the instructors for the last 10 years. Okay? And that changes things. Okay? It puts the information right in front of people. Okay? So the institutions record activities, and we work with the institutions to get their data. Okay? Okay. Archives record accomplishments. This is what an archive looked like when I went to graduate school. That actually could have been Hume Hall at the University of Florida, and that could have been where I studied. You get a chair and go where it's nice and cool and quiet, and you're surrounded by knowledge, and it's fantastic. And right over here in this picture, I don't know why they have this, but right over here it says Soviet Army Operations. So yes, it's an archive. Okay, it has all kinds of things in it. Okay, I just like that kind of connections of things. So we record accomplishments, and we work with the institutional data repositories and the libraries, and VIVO is a library-supported activity. So all of our outreach, all of our faculty support, all of our infrastructure is done through the libraries. Okay? They record accomplishments of the faculty in various ways, and we use data that they have and put it in VIVO to make sure that people can see it, okay, and that it's linked up. Okay? Now, so we're interested in data. We're interested in tools. And the world has changed a lot, so I'm a technologist. I was around at the beginning, before there was this internet thing, and for me, this is just like 1992. So in 1992, I read Mark Andreessen's white paper on the Mosaic browser, and he was talking about this guy, Tim Berners-Lee, at CERN in Switzerland, who had invented this thing called the World Wide Web. And I read that white paper, and I said, we got to have that. We got to have that. I got to get me one of them web server things. I don't know what it is, but I'm getting one. Okay, and we put one up within a few days. And when we put one up, it was the second on campus, and it was numbered under 100 in the world. Right now, the University of Florida has 5,000 websites. Okay? And I can remember going to meetings in 1992 and explaining to people, oh, there's going to be this web thing. It's going to be big. Don't worry about it. It's happening. And they're like, no one will ever give away their data. Okay? People will give away their data. Okay? So the tools have to be good, and the web was good. Okay? The web did not provide for structured information. It did not provide for deep linking of semantic content. But Berners-Lee fixed that and invented the semantic web. Okay? And that's what we're using. So we're very interested in the tools. So if we have the data, what would we do with it? Okay, so we have this data, and we talk about, we have a very broad term called research discovery. Research discovery. And, I guess, different people think about different things different ways. I like to discover. I'm the kind of guy who, goes into Wikipedia and just hits random page. Okay? What's in here? Okay? And, when Wikipedia was started, I would do that every morning for about 20 minutes. Get my cup of coffee in the morning, go over to Wikipedia and just hit a random page. Okay? I got a pretty good idea what was in there. Okay? And how it was, and how deep it was, and who was working on it, and what the obsessions were, and where the corners were, and there's a lot of railroad stations in England. Okay? Okay? So, I got a profound respect for the nature of the community, how it worked, how it was producing information, how it checked itself, and what the breadth and depth and coverage of that thing was. Okay? So I personally like discovery, but I work with a lot of very, very busy clinicians, and the clinicians are like, 20 minutes pushing random. Are you out of your mind? I got patients to see. Okay. So show me a tool I can use, okay? I'm not interested in that, archive thing with the Soviet War Manual. I want like a tool, okay? So we have VIVO. What kind of tools? Okay. Well, clearly we want to be able to find scientists. Okay. We want to find collaborators. We want to find people we can work with. Okay. So this is the kind of tool that we hope to build. Okay. We have the information, and we just have to organize it in software. All this information is in VIVO. Okay, so we want to be able to do something like search for, and it says mandibular cyst researchers in Brazil. Mandibular cyst researchers in Brazil. Okay, all right, So what does that mean, right? What does that mean? Okay, well, first of all, we want researchers. Okay, so the list of the return should be nothing but researchers. I don't want pictures of cysts. I don't want any of that, okay? I want researchers, okay? So every one of these little dots, that should be a researcher, okay? So semantically, I should get that, right? And if I had a researcher, of course, what do I want to know about the researcher? I want their name and address. I want to know that they work in a hospital. I want to know their papers, their presentations, their funding, and go to their profile. Okay, so all that's in VIVO. Okay? That's what VIVO's built to house. Okay, we've got all that. Okay, so making a little thing like that, no problem. Okay, geolocation, no problem. Okay, and so what's the rest of the semantic content up here? The researchers in Brazil. Okay, so don't show me people that have been to Brazil. They got to be in Brazil. Okay, so so they're located in Brazil. And then, of course, the tough part here, mandibular cyst. And this goes back to what I was talking about before, knowledge representation moving up and down knowledge hierarchies. And here it says concepts, related concepts, tumor, odontogenic tumor. Okay, sorry, I have a little trouble with that. Okay, so tumor, so odontogenic tumor, that's a very close match to mandibular cyst. Okay, and then up from there is the much broader class of tumor. So that's the kind of search that we want to be able to do. Okay? We want to be able to study science itself. So there is a Science of Team Science conference. VIVO was at the inaugural work there. They had their second annual this year. We were there again, drawing pictures of networks of scientists. This is a co-principal. So a lot of you have seen like co-publication networks. This person published with that, and this person published with that. This is a co-funding network. So the biomedical people, they go here. Okay, so who's got money and who's got money with who? Okay, and at the center, this is an egocentric network, as they call it. And the center of this network is Kadi Borner, who is our visualization lead for VIVO, and this is her co-PI network from some years ago. So I'm not on here. But you see pictures of people that she's working with, and then it's color-coded by how old that relationship is, and then the circle size has to do with how many dollars are in that relationship. Okay? So possible to draw visualizations of various kinds showing connections between people based on funding. Okay? We're also interested primarily in discovering connections. And I use this example because I lead the project, and occasionally I'm still like surprised. So it's like they bring me something. Did you know VIVO does this? But I actually discovered this one on my own. I was looking at a friend of mine who's the director of our cancer center, and noticed that he had been trained at Mass General Hospital, and I had been treated there. So I thought, oh, great. What do we know about Mass General Hospital? I click on Mass General Hospital. Okay. VIVO had made a page for Mass General Hospital at the University of Florida. Why? Because Mass General Hospital had awarded money to us, and we had awarded money to Mass General Hospital. So when we ingested all of our Division of Sponsored Research data, VIVO had to find an object, and it said, okay, look at this. I've got predicate. I've got two verbs here. The one verb is awards grant. The other, the inverse is subcontracts grant. So we award to them, they award to us. Okay. And so as we had gone through all of the 16,000 awards that are in VIVO at UF, we found a bunch of awards that had been made from Mass General to us and a bunch of awards we had made to Mass General. Okay? And, of course, that happened automatically as we were ingesting the data. So we ended up with all of our research partners having pages that were automatically constructed with these links. Okay. Another kind of tool that we're collaborating on is what's called semantic annotation. So the classic example here is actually Facebook. Likes. He likes this hamburger place. He likes this post. He likes this picture. He likes this whatever. But in science, we could think of those triples: Mike, insert verb, scholarly object. Okay. What is Mike's relationship to that scholarly object? Well, the first thing might have been Mike published the paper. Okay, we get that. Okay, but there are many, many other relationships that a scholar might have to a work. Okay, or that a scholar might have to funding. So it might be, I read this paper. Okay, I don't like this paper. Okay, I challenge this paper. Whatever. Making notations. Okay, in the production of science. So we're very interested in tools that can allow for what we might call semantic reading. So you're sitting there working with objects in science and making notations. You're creating those semantic links as you go. Okay? And you might, one of your semantic links might be, here's 5 people that I follow. Okay? If any other papers show up, tell me. Okay? Here's people I admire. If any, whatever. Okay? So putting people in groups and making semantic connections between the objects of scholarship, we're very interested in that. Okay. All right, so lots of work in progress, lots of, and just to show some various things that are happening. So over here we're repurposing VIVO data at the Institute. So this data is in VIVO, but it's coming to this website live. So we're just calling VIVO and say, can you give me this much information about these people? And it's displaying a little web page, so we can have our webmasters are busy getting rid of their little local, whatever it is, where they ask the faculty member over and over again to supply the same information, and they can just get it from VIVO. This is our international faculty search across the collections of semantically enabled data sources, and our collaborator there is in Thailand. This is work being done as BioSketch. PDF output is work being done at the University of Pittsburgh. This is a consortium that we're engaged with that does also match data in a very simple way, getting counts of faculty with various interests across a wide variety of different data sources. We work with ORCID, which is the Open Researcher and Contributor ID system. VIVO's kind of good at cross-walking identities, so we work with them. This picture is a picture that one of those young people that John was talking to, I had a conversation with someone. I said, well, VIVO has all this organizational information, and it knows that the Department of Pathology is part of the College of Medicine, which is part of the Health Science Center, which is part of the University of Florida. So you can actually crawl that in a recursive way and draw a picture of the University of Florida. And the kid said, cool. And then about 4 hours later, he came back with a graph, this picture, which is the organization of the University of Florida. So there's 500 units shown on this one little picture. Okay? The president's office is in the middle. Things that directly report to the president's office, things that report to that, things that report to that. Big cloud of our extension offices around the state, big cloud in engineering, big cloud in medicine, and then you see various connections between things. So you see a bunch of things that are shared between one college and another college. Okay? So didn't take long. The data is available. It's open. It's easy to consume, and they can do it. This is the basic sort of international architecture. We heard a little bit about plugins. VIVO sort of uses a slightly different approach. We support plugins also, but because the data is widely available. So here's your VIVOs, and they're collecting data. You know, people are putting in data through semantic annotation. Institutional data is being transformed to put into your VIVO. So you get a bunch of point sources of VIVOs. There's no, there may not be any actual interconnection between them at all. A little trouble with that. Okay, but you can have tools sitting out here. The picture of the University of Florida. The picture of the University of Florida was made by an external tool. All it did was take a URL for the University of Florida object in VIVO, point it at VIVO, and start consuming and recursing over that data and drew that picture. We change that URL to the Cornell, and we get a picture of Cornell. Okay? So it's not in the VIVO at the University of Florida. It's sitting out here. It's just an app. Okay. It was a Ruby on Rails, about 100 lines of code, that was sitting out here on a website, and when it was pointed at Florida, it drew a picture of Florida. When it was pointed at Cornell, it drew a picture of Cornell. Okay? So a very, very, very powerful idea. Okay? And anybody can write that kind of program. The VIVO ontology is published. So how you get at data is incredibly open and well known. So I want to close by talking a little bit about how we do our work. This is our primary strategy. Okay, collaborate with everybody. Okay, so it's not. So when we say open, we're talking about open data. We're talking about open software. We're talking about open process. Open. Okay, so we don't have any. We don't have any. I don't work with him. Okay, so publishers, Elsevier, Thomson Reuters, federal government, international groups, everybody. Okay, like I say. That's the strategy, okay? See to the horizon, go, all right? No barriers, just give it away, right? Put it in there and give it away. These are some of our collaborators, okay? So we've been, the project's been going for, I think we're in month 19, something like that. And at UF, we work with the libraries and, of course, the Clinical and Translational Science Institute and our IT organization, the Office of Research, Faculty Senate, Provost's Office, Registrar, on and on and on. Federal agencies, we work with the the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. They're the people who do data.gov. We have a VIVO at the NIH. We work with the National Library of Medicine, the National Science Foundation on their initiatives related to STAR metrics. The VA is interested. The USDA has adopted VIVO. The Federal Demonstration Project. And STAR metrics is a giant thing to understand the value of science to the American economy. We work with publishers and aggregators. We have an agreement with Elsevier Colexis around Scopus data in VIVO. We are about that close with Thomson Reuters regarding ISI and Web of Science. We work closely with ORCID, and we have VIVO team members on their board. We work closely with CiteSeer and integration there, with Archive and with DSpace. MIT has a VIVO installation that they're working on. Of course, we've been in the press and coordinating the messaging around VIVO in Nature Science, the Chronicle of Higher Education, AP Information Technology today. I was on the cover of some gene magazine. I have to apologize for that. I don't know anything about genes, but they thought that it was pretty interesting. Professional societies, we work with the American Academy for the Advancement of Science, the Association of Independent Research Institutes, the American Association for Medical Colleges, the American Psychological Association. These are the research facility guys, and of course, with the MLA and the library associations. International, we have 7 sites in Australia. The National Academy of Sciences in China has translated VIVO, is using it there. We have collaborators in the Netherlands, UK, Brazil. The Lattes project in Brazil is a comparable national. That's a centralized effort to create a researcher identity thing, but they're very interested in our open, exchangeable approach, and sites in Mexico. The Semantic Web Community, Digital Enterprise Research Institute of Derry, Ireland. Tim Berners-Lee came by our website, hooked up his tools to VIVO, sent us a note through our suggestion box, said, "This is fantastic. This is exactly what I thought people were supposed to be doing." My experiment in Manchester, the Concept Web folks, OpenFacts is a giant pharmaceutical coalition out of the EU, the Linked Open Data Community, and then we actually had a hackathon at Florida where we flew a whole bunch of people in, and they programmed on VIVO for 4 or 5 days, and we slipped pizza under the door, and made sure they had plenty of Gatorade, which we did invent, by the way. So drink Gatorade. Okay, that's our tech transfer thing. Okay. Research resources. We collaborate with a sister project out of the NIH called Eagle Eye, which is developing an ontology for representing research resources. There's the Biomedical Research Ontology, and then the eBERT group out of Emory and others. Social Network Analysis Community. We have made sub-awards to Duke for web parts, including Drupal and Drupal Views. The Pittsburgh group doing the BioSketch thing that I showed. Leicester working on ORCID, UMLS working on, Stony Brook working on UMLS, Weil working on an interface for Google Refine, and Indiana working on an interface for Joomla and Hub Zero. We work with dozens and dozens of schools on various projects, but also on adoptions. Okay? Application and service providers of various kinds, so whether it's Mendeley or ResearchGate or others, about 100. And then software downloads in our contact list, each running at about 1,500. This is a couple of months old. That number is now well over 2,000. So how can you get involved? Right? So download the software and join the community. Okay? And to join the community, all you have to do is read. This is a wiki. There's a wiki right over there. Okay? So this is our site, sourceforge.net, vivo.sourceforge.net. Just go there. You'll learn about VIVO. You can get involved. Everything's on display. The programmers did that. I might have said features and bugs, okay? But the programmers wrote bugs and features. What can I say? But certainly, whatever we're working on is on display there. You can get the software. You can go to our conference. You can contribute to the wiki. You can write code. You can download. You can send us questions. You can do whatever you want. Okay? We do have a conference. It is our 2nd annual conference. And it will be held August 24th to 26th at the Gaylord in D.C. And I hope to see some of you there. So with that, I'm going to close and take some questions. Thank you.
Okay, I'll ask one.
Yeah.
How easy is it to take stuff out of the university's systems and push into VIVO? And then to what extent are the people that are in VIVO maintaining the currency of the data?
Right. So we have a whole implementation team that designs and produces interfaces for various things. And it is not a push-button operation. Getting data out of PeopleSoft, and so if you're trying to get, so for us, our HR data is in PeopleSoft. That's a big, complicated system. Okay, so getting data out of a system like PeopleSoft and formatting it around and getting it in here is work. Okay, so somebody's going to do work. Okay, to do that. Now, once you have an ingest, okay, running it, on a weekly basis or nightly basis or whatever you want to do to keep the data current is fine. Okay. So the work is up front, okay? And we recommend that the institutions plan ahead and identify their sources of data. Are we going to put course data in? Yes. Coming from the registrar, what kind of data? Okay. We're going to put contact information. Where are we going to get it? Okay. So we have templates and recommendations to say, here's the kinds of data you might want to be putting in. Here's where we think you're probably going to get it. Here are some of the systems that we've already done. Okay. But there is actually real work there. It's an enterprise system. It's collecting data from institutional sources, and it's not a hobby. People have to get in there and do it. Yeah.
And so people are using the regular systems to update the information, and then it
exactly.
goes back to
Exactly.
VIVO.
We do have some data that is sourced out of VIVO. Some of the connection data wouldn't exist in the institutional sources, and some of the faculty comments and annotation data. So when the faculty member says, "These are my research interests," okay, we might have a source for that. We didn't. Okay, so they get to say that in VIVO. Okay, yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the faculty information. Suppose they presented a paper somewhere and it's not in VIVO. Who puts it in? Is it optional that the faculty put it in? Do the faculty themselves put it in? How does that work?
Right. So those are local institutional decisions about how they want to manage their VIVO. Most universities are choosing to automate as much as they can. And so they automate a feed from PubMed, they automate a feed from Scopus or from Thomson Reuters, and try to get as many publications automatically put on faculty profiles as they can. Now, I give presentations all the time. Now, there is no source for that. I would, if I want that on my VIVO profile, I have to do it, or find somebody to do it. Yeah.
If they want to use a commercial database, say Scopus, what are the licensing problems with them pulling the information directly into VIVO?
Right. So we have a licensing agreement with Elsevier that allows Scopus data in particular to be reused in VIVO. So if you have a license for Scopus, you can take the publication reference into VIVO and give it away. Okay, and they allow that. Yep.
And that information is open to the world,
yes,
not just the people that...
It goes straight to Google Scholar.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. Scraped immediately.
So building on that, are there plugins, tools for making that happen that are shared in the VIVO community, or how does that work?
Yeah, for ingesting like PubMed data, sure, we have scripts that do that. So they will go to PubMed, get data, okay, and put it into the VIVO. Okay? And you can run that.
ISI, Web of Science, Scopus, all these things.
Yeah,
okay.
exactly. So it's a project where we develop those things, and we learn about new ones every day. So I got an email yesterday. We worked out a deal with Biomed Central, for their open source journals, and they want us to pull in their data, and we will have to develop some scripts to do that. And same for PLOS. They want us to pull in their stuff too, and so we have to develop some scripts to do that. What we're doing now is actually farming some of that out to our community. So as the community builds, we can say, hey, we're doing the Biomed Central one. Why don't you do the PLOS one? And we share work and talk on the phone and get that thing spread so it can grow.
Okay, well, thank you, Mike.
Okay.
Appreciate this a lot.
All right.
I want to make a plug for something that's happening next year. This year in the fall. We saw a co-PI network visualization here. At the center of that was Kadi Borner. We are bringing her Places and Spaces exhibit here, sponsored by the College of Information, UNT Libraries, Center for the Study of Interdisciplinarity, College of Visual Arts and Design. Who am I missing, Catherine? Student Services, the Office of Research and Economic Development. And it's going to be here. It's going to arrive in the summertime, and the kids' exhibit is going to be at the Emily Fowler Public Library. Then in the fall, it will be on display from September through January out at Discovery Park, which is our home for the College of Information and College of Engineering. And if you don't know about Places and Spaces, Google it. It's basically about mapping science through information visualization. Each year, they're producing 10 new maps. And we'll be premiering the 7th iteration here, and it's science maps as visual interfaces to digital libraries. And it just seems so appropriate given the digital library work here, to have that one come here and have it then. So Catherine Clodfelter, would you stand up, please, so people can see you? She's the Associate Director for TXCDK, Texas Center for Digital Knowledge, and is coordinating this effort, all right, and is spending way too much time doing this and letting some of her other work obligations go, but this is really important. And so hopefully all of you that are on campus will look forward to seeing it here, and those that are visiting will make a point to come up, and we'll do a lot of advertising around it as well. One more plug. That is not so much a plug, but an invitation. We at Texas Center for Digital Knowledge have downloaded and installed VIVO, all right? If anybody is interested in trying to figure out how we might implement that here in kind of a bottoms-up approach rather than asking top-level administration and so on, it'd be fun to play with it. If you're interested, I'd be happy to talk with you about it. Cliff Whitworth, Cliff, would you stand up? He's a research scientist at the College of Information and is going to be working with VIVO just kind of to see what we can do with it. So those two things just want to put on your plate. Okay, next we have Greg Tananbaum. He's going to talk about the hows and whys of campus-based open access funds. We know Greg from his work with SPARC, the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition, SPARC, which has been a primary advocate for open access to scholarly information. Greg is the founder and CEO of Anianak, a professional network that connects Chinese scholars to their counterparts in America and Europe. He also serves as a consultant to publishers, libraries, and universities through what he owns as Scholar Next. He writes a regular column in Against the Grain covering emerging developments in the field of scholarly communication. So would you welcome Greg in his presentation? Thank you.
Just give me a second here to get set up. It's fascinating to hear. I think we have a great representation today of what people are actually doing when it comes to open access. For many years, these meetings and these conversations were hypothetical and theoretical, and to see real practical application is a validation for the model. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation, of course. I am a consultant. Among the clients I consult for is SPARC, which is the leading advocate of open access. And that has been a very, very interesting engagement for me. One of the things that I've had the good fortune to do is to look at, over the past few years, the emergence of campus-based open access funds. And I'll explain what those are and who is doing what with them. But it is something where, again, we're seeing practical application. It's not just people talking, not just institutions talking or libraries talking. It's actual movement. So what I'll talk about today is I'll explain what these funds actually are. I'll talk about how they got launched and who is using them and how they're using them. Then I'll step back a little bit and talk about motivation. Why are schools launching these funds? Why might you launch a fund? Talk about some of the key policy and practical questions, and then talk about, if you want to learn more or talk more about it, how you can get further up to speed when it comes to this concept of an open access fund. Well, what is it? An open access fund is a pool of institutional money that is set aside specifically to support open access publishing models. So it is quite practically a component, a unit of the institution, typically the library, says we're going to set aside a specific set of, specific sum of money, and we are going to say that if our scholars want to publish in open access journals, we are going to support them. We're going to support them by cutting a check to pay for their author, for their publication fees. There are a variety of reasons why schools are operating these funds. There are a variety of different policy nuances and eligibility nuances, but taken collectively, these funds are about promoting open access as a publishing model, promoting openness of digital content, and fostering experimentation. So all the schools, and I'll talk about who has done this in just a minute, but all the schools that have started these funds have gone into it really without a sense of where it is going. They've set aside a certain amount of money. They don't know if it's enough. They don't know if it's too much. They don't know what's going to happen when that pot runs out. They're just not sure. What they are sure of is they want to foster experimentation when it comes to open access, and they're putting some money behind that to tangibly support it. Talking about how this got started and who's using it now. There are 14, I believe, I'm pretty sure, 14 active North American institutions. I'm going to just look at the list. It's Berkeley, Calgary, Columbia, Cornell, Duke, Florida, Harvard, Michigan, MIT, Oregon, Tennessee, UNC Chapel Hill, Wake Forest, and Wisconsin. I was going to try and memorize that and come up with a mnemonic device, but around MIT it just got too confusing, so I will read the list. So there are 14 schools, as I said. Some of those have been operating for 2 years. Others have started within the past 6 months. One of the key driving factors behind this notion of a campus-based open access fund was COPE, the Compact for Open Access Publishing Equity, COPE. And this is a petition that was launched in the fall of 2009 by 5 institutions, Harvard, Dartmouth, Cornell, MIT, and Berkeley. And these 5 schools launched this petition, this compact, to codify a university's commitment to, quote, the timely establishment of durable mechanisms for underwriting reasonable publication charges for open access journals. So these 5 schools, 5 very prominent institutions, said, hey, we want to very, very clearly state that as institutions, we need to do more to support this model of publishing. We want to have this move from the margins to the mainstream, and we need to be active in our support of it. And if we don't, the model is going to be in danger. So these 5 schools stood up. They boldly said, hey, we want to support this. And what happened? Well, not much, actually, is what happened. So in those 2 years, since almost 2 years since the compact was launched, only 9 other institutions have signed on. So it was this online petition. It started with 5. It's at 14 now. So on some level, you can't say that it was a great success. On the other hand, it was very successful in generating a lot of discussion, in generating a lot of dialogue, and not just within the library or the scholarly communication community, but within campuses, different units within the campus. So faculty heard about this, and vice provost's office heard about it, and vice chancellors heard about it, and research offices heard about it, and it sparked, pun intended, sparked a dialogue within campuses, within institutions, about what the role of the institution should be in supporting open access publication. And it helped move the discussion from something that was really very, very contained within the library world into this broader campus discussion. We see here, obviously, in this symposium, who the sponsors are. This has moved beyond the library, which I think is terrific. The bottom line, though, when it comes to COPE, when it comes to campus-based open access funds, we're really, I don't even know if we're in the beta stage. We may still be in the alpha stage of experimentation. We have a small band of institutions that are testing this concept and doing it in sort of a very seat-of-their-pants manner. And I don't know if it means a year from now or 2 years from now that number is going to go from 14 to 28 or 280. We're just going to have to see. Why are these schools launching a fund? Well, I think John Malinsky actually had an excellent point in his talk. He talked about the library, the institutions taking an active role in changing the ecology of academic publishing. Well, this is an active role in changing the ecology of academic publishing. Certainly, different institutions have different motives for why they would want to see that change. And I have had the good fortune of talking to all 14 of these institutions, very, very interesting people, very committed people who are behind this. And they have, as I said, a variety of motivations. Some feel very strongly that we just have to do something to stop this principle of double dipping, and we have to do something to improve access. And again, most of you are in the library community here, this notion of double dipping, the university, by and large, directly or indirectly funds the research. The faculty goes and writes a paper, sends it off to a journal. You then pay to get it back. It's a system that if it didn't exist and I tried to invent it and pitch it to you, you would laugh at me. It doesn't. It's in that sense, it's ripe for change. And then this notion of improving access, right? We want to have more access to more research. That leads to additional developments, additional advancements in science, in the advancement of human knowledge, and that matters. Another reason for launching a fund is to impact publishing behaviors, to say to our faculty, we believe fundamentally that with a level playing field, you would want your content to be more accessible. And so what we're going to do is we're going to level that playing field. We're going to say the money that would have otherwise come out of your pocket in the form of an author fee, we'll underwrite that for you. And let's see if that has an impact on your behavior. Some schools actually said that they started their fund as a reaction to faculty interest. So it was a bottom-up movement. Most of these, the library said, hey, we're going to launch the fund. Let's see if anyone's interested. Some schools, a handful, said, people came to us and said, hey, we want to publish in open access journals. What can you do to help us? As a result of those conversations, over time, they launched these funds. Others have said, again, this idea of improving access, somewhat related to that, the visibility of their research. They wanted to be able to say, as an institution, University of Florida, for example, here's what we do. Here's what we're good at. Here is the depth and the breadth of our intellectual output. And one way to do that is to not just provide a link over to Elsevier or Wiley Blackwell or Springer Cites, but to say, and here's the content. Here's the full text. And still other schools said, we launched this because we were engaged in conversations with our faculty, with our deans, with our research offices, and we were brainstorming about ways that we could work together to advance the more open strategy campus-wide, and this is a component of that. So there's a URL here. I invite you to go to it. A wise consultant put a lot of the information that's up there on the page, so hopefully you'll find it useful. But there's actually, the URL is a living, breathing document. So it quantitatively talks about what these 14 and growing schools are doing in terms of the number of papers they've supported, in terms of how much money they've set aside, in terms of what their policies are, who is eligible. And we update that twice a year. So as I said, it's growing over time, and it's useful to have a look at. What are most of these schools doing? Again, it's hard to generalize too much because there's this wide variation in terms of how these funds are set up. Most of them have set aside at least $20,000, usually from the library budget, for these purposes. Very few of them have, if any, I think maybe not even any of them yet, have tapped out their funds. So they've set aside the money, they haven't necessarily used it all yet. And there's no policy uniformity. I'm going to talk about policy in just a minute, but it's not as though there's a cookie-cutter, here's how you do the fund. There are a series of questions, a series of possibilities that you should consider if you're thinking about starting a fund. We enumerate those very clearly on the site based on the feedback of schools that have launched these funds. And not just in terms of wide variance of policy, there's a wide variance in results to date. So here's tangible information. Here's data. What this represents is the median among institutions that have had funds active across the entire time frame. So we're not counting schools that just launched their funds a few months ago, but schools that have had funds for 2 years or more. Nope, you know what? That's wrong. This is articles just approved through January of 2011. The next one has the caveat to it. But in this one, this is all the 14 schools and the number of articles they've approved, again, through January, where the last set of data is. It may be hard to see. Calgary has approved 151 articles through their open access fund, Berkeley 101, and goes all the way down to MIT, who's the laggard with one. I should mention MIT, some of these schools, MIT and Duke specifically, they just launched their funds. So to say their successes or failures, it's really early days with all of them, but especially some that are on the tail end. I should also note, just as an aside, you see Calgary at the top end of the scale. Andrew Waller was just honored as Biomed Central's Open Access Advocate of the Year. He's the driving force behind this fund, and this is an extension of his work he's doing more widely for open access. Now this page, this is one where this represents the median among institutions with funds active across the entire time frame. So schools that had funds in January in 2010, the median number of authors that they had, unique submitting authors that they had processed was 19 as of January 2010. By July, it had risen to 26.5, and a year from the start point, it was 30.5. So what we're seeing here is authors are increasingly taking advantage of open access funds, but it's not, it's not an incredible ramp up. It's not as though we went from 0 to 150 miles an hour like that. Why is this? Well, we can speculate a little bit. I was talking to some folks beforehand, and I think one of the reasons is marketing. Most institutions have done limited marketing when it comes to these funds. In fact, one institution that I know of, was just talking to someone, they sent out an email to select people to announce their fund 6 months ago, and then didn't do anything else. And their fund hasn't had much take-up. Well, there's a direct correlation. It's interesting to note, libraries have taken on a marketing role in just ever-increasing spaces over the last 10 to 15 years. And it's a different skill set. It's not, it's not informatics. It's not the types of things that you would normally associate with the librarian role. But we see it in scholarly communications. We see it in open access. We see it in a lot of different areas. And this is, specifically a place where marketing acumen will pay off. Just to talk a little bit about the policy questions. I say right here that the whys impact the hows. And what I mean by that is an institution's motivation for launching a fund will affect the policies and the procedures that it chooses for that fund. The most prominent example, the most obvious example, comes with hybrid journals. That sounds like some sort of nanotechnology robot journal. But in reality, a hybrid journal is a journal where it is a traditional subscription journal, and authors can pay a fee to buy open access for their paper. So the entire journal will be closed. You pay a fee. Your paper becomes open access within that closed journal. That's a hybrid. And to quote from the Spark Guide when it comes to open access funds and hybrid journals, hybrid journals do indeed make articles more accessible by offering them to any reader free of charge. Therefore, for institutions that place accessibility front and center for their fund's goals, hybrid publications further that mission. In contrast, institutions keen on affecting change within scholarly publishing may feel that some hybrid journals are little more than a shell game to perpetuate the status quo. These institutions often conclude that it is counterproductive to fund hybrid journals. So if you're motivated with your fund to change the world of scholarly publishing, then supporting these hybrid journals, you may feel, well, that just perpetuates it. It's just giving the Springers and the Elsevieres more money from a different source and really not changing anything. If, on the other hand, you're really motivated by making sure that content written by your scholars is as accessible as possible, then you might be differently motivated when it comes to hybrids. So, that's one example when we talk about why are you doing this and how it can affect what you do. And I'll talk more about hybrids quantitatively in just a minute. But another example on these policy questions has to do with reimbursements. So how much should you reimburse? Should you reimburse 100% of an author's open access publishing charge, no matter what it is? Should you cap it at a certain amount? Certain institutions have set lower ceilings on their per article reimbursements so that theoretically more authors will be able to experiment with the fund. If you give less per author, more money is available for other authors. Other institutions have set a higher limit with the feeling that if they only subsidize part of the fund, then certain authors aren't going to be able to make up that difference, and so they're not going to use the fund at all, and they're not going to be exposed to open access publishing. No right or wrong answer to these questions. Again, they're just questions you need to think about if you decide a fund is something you want to do. There are a number of specific issues in terms of what content gets covered, what outlets are eligible, who gets covered. So who gets covered, for example? Is it just your faculty members? What about postgrads or postdocs or graduate students or researchers, students? I mean, there's, who are you going to cover is a thought. Another practical example, what if a paper is co-authored, one of the authors is at your institution, another is not? Are you funding the whole publication charge, or you just fund part of it? lots of little sub-issues to think about. Again, nothing is a deal breaker, nothing is prohibitive, but careful thought should be given beforehand. And again, there's a URL here at the end which explains a lot of these issues, and in fact, in a handy chart fashion, we'll laundry list them, I think. Okay, so just to talk a little bit more about hybrids, of the 14 institutions that have these funds, half of them have a policy that they will support hybrids, half do not. The half that do, this graph represents the percentage of reimbursed articles that are hybrids. So again, you can see all over the map. At Wake Forest, 71% of the articles they reimburse are these hybrid journals, articles that have been bought out of servitude, if you will. Wisconsin has a policy that they'll support it, but they haven't actually done so in any cases. Okay, just to talk about on the practical side of things. You know, the library is going to be providing, quite likely, going to be providing the money and the manpower to operate these funds. But it is necessary, it is appropriate, it is crucial, quite frankly, for other campus units to get involved, to help inform policies, to help generate outreach plans, to just bottom line, to increase the fund's chances of making an impact. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means before launching the fund that you're going to want to consult with key instruments within your organization, within your campus, the research office, the provost's office, the faculty advisory committees. And the reason you want to do that is it's going to widen the project from just a library experiment to a campus-wide initiative. It's going to help provide validation for open access at an institutional level. It's going to help surface departments that might be able and interested to take up this fund, to make use of it very, very quickly, immediately. And it's also going to help surface departments that may need a more sort of remedial level of education when it comes to open access, when it comes to scholarly communication issues. That dialogue in the early days is going to help you, throughout the life of the fund. Certainly having an ongoing dialogue will also be useful. It'll help you tweak your policies and your procedures and make them more efficient as you get feedback from the campus about what is working and what is not working. I mentioned a little bit about marketing. Certainly when you're promoting the fund, you would be wise to leverage the existing communication channels that link the library to faculty, to the authoring communities on your campus. So we're talking about subject specialists. We're talking about scholarly communication librarians. We're talking about the library website and any blogs the library may have. Some libraries are tweeting now, those types of things. But it's not simply the case that you can create a web page, you can send out an announcement, open the doors, and expect people to use it. It's silly on some level because there clearly on most campuses are people publishing in open access journals. What you're saying is, we will give you money to do this. And to go out and have to bang the drum to explain that seems a little bit foolish, but that's the world we live in. And if you want the fund to succeed and if you want to promote open access, there will be some of that will, of course, be necessary. Regardless of the medium you're using, it is quite likely going to be necessary to start at a very basic level when promoting the fund. And I'm talking about explaining about open access, explaining about the choices involved, explaining about the mechanics of how you will cut the check and when you will cut the check. In terms of the philosophical piece, many faculty members have only a very rudimentary knowledge when it comes to open access and the problems that spark the establishment of the open access model. We assume, because we talk about it all the time, that everyone knows about it and everyone has a baseline level of understanding. But in talking to institutions that have launched and operated these funds, many of them have expressed to me regret that they didn't start at a lower level, that they assumed too high a level of understanding among their faculty about scholarly communication, about open access, and they wish that they had been, as I said, started at a lower level. It's also important to note that there's a limit to how much you can push your faculty when it comes to embracing open access. This desire to promote open access has to be balanced against the need to play a supportive role in your faculty's publishing activities, regardless of what decisions they make. It's worth noting that in certain instances, whether it's the humanities especially, but in other fields as well, there may not be viable first choice publishing options in the open access realm for scholars, and we can't push them, we can't force them to publish in specific journals. We can only guide and inform their choices. There was a comment earlier in the session about impact factors and publishing in high impact journals, and that matters to a lot of people, and it may be changing. It probably is changing, but it's changing slowly. And to say, no, go publish in this new journal that's not indexed and doesn't have an impact factor, there are some people who will say, sure, I get it, the benefits of openness, and I can make this case, as John outlined before. I can make this case about how often my paper is read and how often it's cited, and I'm comfortable making that. Others will say, I'm just not ready to do that, and we have to sort of accept that there's going to be this spectrum. In terms of managing the fund on an ongoing basis, the setup fund, there's a setup piece, and then there's the pre-launch and the post-launch piece. And pre-launch, the setup energy that's expended among institutions that have launched these funds to date has been relatively modest. This isn't a huge undertaking. You need to determine your policies. You need to determine your marketing plan. You need to determine your procedures for vetting the applications that are going to come in and how you're going to approve and disperse the funds. And there are subtleties there. So when you cut the check, do you cut it when the paper is finally published, when it's been accepted? What do you use as proof? There are just little things that you have to get down. But I will say that again, based on experience, institutions that have set up open access funds to date have indicated that it usually takes about 1 to 3 months to nail all these issues down, and we're talking about a small piece of a designated manager's time within that 1 to 3 months. This isn't a full-time gig or anything near approaching that. Often, but not always, the management of the fund is assigned to the scholarly communications librarian if a school has one, in part because it's consistent with other aspects of that librarian's portfolio. So it has potential synergies with self-archiving, with institutional repositories, with the university as publisher. It ties into some of those issues, and it's part of the dialogue that hopefully that person has established with other members of campus. In terms of after launch, how much time we're talking about, well, again, quantifying specifically is difficult, but in talking to schools that have these funds, they've indicated that as a very rough rule of thumb, it takes between 15 and 45 minutes to vet an article from the initial submission through payment. So from the time an application comes in to the time that it's approved and the check is cut, the amount of time expended, not in one block, is only between 15 and 45 minutes. It's not a huge amount of time. The bulk of the time gets taken up by verifying that the person is in fact eligible to receive these funds and verifying that the publication in which they're publishing is eligible to be covered by the fund as well. So in terms of next steps, I am, somewhat ironically, given that I work with Spark, I consider myself an open access agnostic. I'm not advocating that you launch a fund. As we've seen, there is interesting early data when it comes to these funds, but by no means is it a slam dunk in terms of the return on investment. Having said that, I do think there's real promise if you are looking for ways to explore expanding the general consciousness of open access on your campus. I think this is a viable tool. There is lots of information on the Spark page that we have created about both philosophical and practical issues when it comes to these funds. The COPE site I would refer you to as well to see what these schools have committed to in terms of establishing these durable mechanisms. And I would say also talk to us, meaning me and others at Spark, and talk to institutions that have launched these funds. The 14 schools with which I've interacted that have these funds are incredibly gracious in sharing their experiences, in sharing their failures and what they wish they had done differently, as well as their successes. And I would invite you certainly to talk to any of them as well as me. That is all I formally have, so I'm going to open it up to questions and see if I can answer anything that may be on the floor.
Hi, I'm one of those faculty members, and I'm really interested in this. My specialty is health informatics, and so it's really taking off in that area. But one of the things that I've run into is the credibility of the idea that you're paying to publish. And that was one thing I thought maybe you could speak to and how maybe they've done that.
Well, one of the ways that this counteracts that is by saying you're not paying to publish, we're paying for you to publish, right? Meaning the institution is validating this is a model that is legitimate. Now, I mean, there are certainly journals that are less reputable, both open access journals and non-open access journals. In open access, there's this fear that there's this sort of perverse incentive to publish anything because every time we publish, we get paid as a journal, right? So therefore, we're going to accept anything that comes over the transom, and we're just going to cash their checks, and that'll be that. And there are some publishers that are like that, but they're really, really on the margins. Most open access journals in the mainstream are reputable. They have peer review of the same quality that is the traditional closed access journal. Many of them have impact factors now and are indexed in increasing numbers by ISI and others. And so I would say, choose your publication outlet carefully, of course, and don't choose a bad journal simply to get published, regardless of whether that journal is open access or closed access. But I do think that issue of it's open access and therefore it's somehow less legitimate, the volume of that argument has gone down over the past 3 to 5 years.
Do you have an idea of what the range of fees that you see?
Sure. I mean, I would say the average fee for a publication charge is somewhere around $1,500. The sort of range has sort of settled in between $1,000 and $2,500, I guess, is where we typically see the fees. Some of the work that Public Library of Science and Biomed Central is the most visible and prominent of these publishers. Some of the work that they've done has set the market on that, so that if you go too far above, there's a bit of pushback. So Nature, for example, recently announced that they're launching an open access journal, and their fees, I think, were above $2,000, and they had to explain why they were priced on the upper end of the market. So there's an expectation now. Other questions?
Let me just add something, because it was a real learning experience for me last year as we were talking to people about the open access policy and finding out about people, faculty members paying for publication, page charges and things like that. And it occurred to me, it's like, well, does this come out of your pocket? Does it come out of the department's pocket? And I was unaware that there's no real institutional support for that. And so Jean here, working in art history, and have colleagues working in publishing in art history, the costs that they have to incur with graphics, images, and things like that. And so I think this is a really important opportunity to consider all the charges that faculty members have to pay in terms of scholarly communication and publishing. So
there certainly in the humanities and some of the areas where digital scholarship is an issue, that is one of the considerations. It's exactly, I just pay to have someone publish a text article in in an indexed open access journal. This is a larger conversation. You're absolutely right.
So a couple of specific questions, because we are considering this actually at UNT, and maybe I missed it. I had to step out for just a second. But are these funds typically only funded by the library or in cooperation with the provost office, or are there varied sort of streams that undergird this?
Almost every institution that has one has the library as either a primary or a co-funder. There are some schools that have pulled in support from the provost or from other offices. Again, we're talking about, on average, $20,000 gets set aside. So it's not trivial, but it's, we're not talking about an endowed chair or that level.
Is it there was a wide variation, because of when they adopted it between the different institutions on that chart. Is the other variation I'm interested in knowing about is it in the policies or the ways that these things get implemented, do faculty members get like a flat rate, or is it some sliding scale depending on the journal or the type of material that they're publishing?
There is some of that they will pay. They'll pay either up to a certain amount. They will pay the entire amount no matter what. They will pay a certain percentage if you are one of several authors and not all the authors are at the institution. You will pay for certain charges and not others. All of these, the good thing is, again, on the website, not to keep referring to people to that, but it's detailed at a very minute level what specifically the policies at each of these institutions are. So you can see, well, that might work for us or that might not.
Are there, last question
Sure.
on it, are there, you sort of alluded to the kind of the outreach and the marketing functions that make these funds more successfully taken up. Are there particular kinds of marketing efforts like workshops on it? Because you're right. I mean, we're all bombarded by information. Certainly, faculty members are. How do we get that information? If we set up a fund like this, how do we get that information in front of people so they know about it and how to use it in a consistent way?
So that is certainly, direct face-to-face communication with faculty members is the best way. So a number of schools have said they've had great success with setting up with individual departments or units or schools within their university, brown bag lunches or meetings or so forth to talk about not necessarily just the fund, but developments from the library. And people were surprised and happy to learn about this. Other schools have said they went through and looked at, for example, on Biomed Central's website, they did a search for their institution and saw people who were affiliated with their institution who had published in these journals previously and reached out to them and said, hey, look, going forward, if you're interested in this, did you know we have this fund, and tell your friends? And that was successful as well. But it will take proactive effort, as I said before, to promote the fund. People aren't just going to flock to it as a matter of course.
Any other questions?
Okay, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
I just wanted to do an update on where we are with the policy, because there was a reference made to being at level 7 this morning. So the Faculty Senate approved the open access policy in March here at the university, and we're very pleased by that. It only took a year and lots of conversations, and Martin was very good at telling me and convincing me that sometimes the best is the enemy of the good, which allowed for compromise to happen, all right, to get it approved. And we have a few people here who served on the Open Access Policy Committee. Floyd McDaniels over here from Physics, Gene Miller from College of Visual Arts and Design, Kathy Hartman back there from Libraries, and Martin and I co-chaired it. Am I missing anybody? Okay. So anyway, the way that policy happens here, faculty have no power to approve academic policy. All they can do is show their support for it. And then it goes into the policy mill of the university, and that's where it is now. And yesterday I called the policy office saying, what's our status? And I've been doing this the last few weeks saying, we have this symposium come on. It'd be really nice to be able to say, it's been approved. Well, she left a voice message for me this morning and said it was given to our general counsel, who's at the system level now, not at the university level, on May 10th. And when she checked back, the general counsel office has put a moratorium on policy review because of staff shortage of staff. And they're only going to be reviewing critical policies going forward for the next little while. And so she went back to them saying, can I have the list of what you consider critical policies? And we'll see if we're on that list, all right? But we have every hope that sooner or later, UNT will have a formally adopted, signed off by the Board of Regents policy on open access. But until that time, we're going to keep pushing our open access work, and Martin is going to introduce Mark Phillips to talk a little bit about that. Oops, sorry.
And it's worth reviewing. Well, and I have actually no doubt we're going to get that policy done. It's just a matter of churning through the institutional policy mill. The nature of the best versus the good thing that Bill was alluding to is we had, at Stephen Harnad's urging, among other people from last year, he was our keynote speaker last year, we had inserted clauses that were pretty strong in the initial draft of that policy, which were around mandatory deposit. And we kind of hammered that point into a lot of the parts of it. Well, the faculty didn't respond too well to that kind of language. And you know, it was very interesting. One sidebar comment that I think, Bill, you passed along to me, that, you know, when we softened that language, there was an immediate, you know, greater receptivity to it. And there was a comment that, oh, you changed it away from that mandatory stuff. Well, now I can absolutely get all my stuff in there. I can get behind it. I'm going to start depositing things in it right away, you know, even before you've got a policy in place. So, you know, that was an interesting learning moment. So to hear a little bit more about the mechanics of our deposit system, of the ways that we're going to be using open access and deploying it here at UNT, we thought it would be useful and instructive to have a brief presentation by Mark Phillips, who is our Assistant Dean for Digital Libraries. Mark joins us with he is a librarian. He has a master's from UNT in library science, but he also has a bachelor's in music performance. So if you ever wonder, well, you know, what else can you do with a music degree, that's one of the things you can do with it. He is our architect for the UNT digital library infrastructure, which is quite an apparatus at this point. It stores millions of digital objects and represents all sorts of different collections. We run on the behalf of the entire state, the Portal to Texas History, and a whole variety of other things. He was just recently appointed this year to the Depository Library Council for the Government Printing Office, which is quite a distinction. So Mark is going to be advising the GPO in programs of how they go forward with especially digitization. He has presented at many national and international events and conferences, and is particularly, I think, well known for web archiving topics. So join me in welcoming Mark.
Okay, so we wanted to talk a little bit about open access at the UNT libraries. As Martin mentioned, we have quite an investment in the digital library infrastructure, and the way that manifests itself to the end user typically comes through two different interfaces. One is actually the digital library, the UNT digital libraries. This is the URL. That's the front page. This is for all of the, it's a centralized repository for the rich collections that are either purchased by the university, that are acquired by the university, collected by the university, or created by the university. It's really focused on the UNT faculty, scholarly, student output. The other interface that we maintain and we're also very well known for is our Portal to Texas History, which this is the URL to that, and the front, kind of the front door view of that. This is a system which we provide services in both digitization and metadata work and hosting and long-term preservation for institutions around the state of Texas. Currently, we have over 160 institutions that rely on our infrastructure, and we provide access to their content and then provide a set of services to our faculty on this unique content that then we house here at the University of North Texas. In total, we have over 183,000 items in the repository, which is 4.2 million pages of content. When we start to then deal with all of the various pieces that are involved in a page of content. We're up in the scale of 36 million files that we manage in our repository. It's right at 60 terabytes of data as a single copy, which we then replicate throughout the state of Texas in a variety of means. So it's a rather large endeavor. I was looking at there's been a lot of discussion about integration into Google Scholar. And one of the things that we're really excited about is the amount of effort that we've put into optimizing our systems for indexing by a lot of the major search engines. And when you go through and you look at the statistics, so I ran this last night, and it's just for the last year, but we had over 3.2 million item uses within the system. And how you count use for us, we're looking at use equaling a digital circulation. So this isn't page views, this isn't hits. These are actually really fairly solid numbers. It's not exactly downloads, it's not exactly views, because when you start to get into repositories, all those numbers get very blurry. But one of the things is that the 3.2 million uses is actually going to be higher and higher every year as we put more content into the system, as it gets better indexed. And this is just providing access to those items. Another really interesting thing is, so we have 183,000 items. 170,000 of those got used at least twice. So that's a great utilization over an entire corpus, as opposed to how many books got used in the library. It's a little bit different. I think a lot of that's the improved access mechanisms that we can provide online. The main system that I'm going to talk to you about today is the UNT Digital Library. In all, we have in just that interface, we have 46 different collections, and these are a wide-ranging assortment of content, from government documents to early music scores to recordings of pop music, recordings from the College of Information, or pieces that are very normal for an institutional repository, large runs of government documents, and video collections from our media library, a very wide range of collections. We have what we would term as partners with this, which are typically the academic units within the university. And as of right now, we have 17 partners who contribute content to the UNT digital libraries for access. In addition to, and that's just within the UNT digital library, there's over 160 partners within the Portal of Texas History, and some contribute content to both. Items can move in and out of systems fairly easily. When thinking about looking at highlighting a few collections, I wanted to focus on things that I think really hit that idea of open access that we're pushing forward. We have tons of content, tons of collections, and we'd be here for hours. It's kind of daunting to think about, like, what cool stuff could we talk about? And honestly, a lot of this content is pretty much in the last year, a lot of this has come online. So it's much more recent. There's some that are kind of our warhorse collections, which are just really fascinating, which I'll also talk about. The first one I want to mention is the Congressional Research Service reports, CRS reports. This is a collection of roughly 11,000 documents, which are created by a branch of the Library of Congress, which we collect, describe, and host online. And in many cases, we're the only repository for certain reports. These cover everything that Congress talks about, which is pretty much everything, very broad. And when we see the actual usage of this, one of the things that was talked about earlier was the ability for libraries to show use of the content. And I think that's one of the areas where we're trying to kind of push forward and try to really show people how the collections are getting used and how items in a collection's used. And so our first steps at this is really just trying to aggregate up all of these 11,000 items and how much they get used. In this collection alone, it's almost 1,000 uses per day on average of these 11,000 items. And it's just a heavily utilized collections. And it's really interesting, the the day before the federal government's supposed to shut down, you see massive spikes. Thousands and thousands of people want to look, and it's like, oh, have we ever done this before? Why, yes, there's many CRS reports on what happens when the federal government shuts down. And since they're heavily indexed by Google in that, and the various search engines, as they search, they just automatically come to resources that we provide access to. Another collection that we're experimenting with is in the creation of completely online open access collections. So whenever we had a desire to create a collection completely from scratch from items that are publicly available, we didn't want to just point to it and create another guide, but we actually wanted to pull in the content and provide services uniquely to our campus. So we focused on environmental policy. And this is another collection that's just really, if you think about it in kind of traditional library terms, it's pretty impressive. There's 669 items in this collection. And within about a year, those have circulated or had usage of 42,000 times. Just imagine a shelf of 600 things and 42,000 times going on and off that shelf from use. It's pretty impressive. I mean, it's really over 100 uses per day of this collection. And it's only 600 items. And these are full text. You can search down to all the terms in all of the pages. And then we're actually seeing this collection, all of the metadata from that being harvested through OAI PMH, the Open Archives Initiative's protocol for metadata harvesting, and integrated into other repositories like the NSF's National Digital Science, or NSDL, National Science Digital Library. And a lot of their aggregators of content are viewing this as one of the exemplar collections for environmental policy, which is just kind of fun because it's an experiment we were trying to do. But it shows a new area where we can start building collections and services, where as we start to look at supporting research clusters on campus and various new programs where the vast majority of their content is not available in printed form, and there's not a huge historic record of that content, this is a really exciting area for us to collect content and bring it local. Another collection that we're really well known for is the Cyber Cemetery, which we started in 1996 with our first website. Now we're up to over 80 websites that we harvest and provide long-term access. And these are websites for government agencies and commissions that have been either defunded or they've served their purpose, they've submitted that report, and they no longer have funding to keep their web presence alive. In some cases, that's surprisingly short. You post your final report, and within a month, you're zeroed out on your budget. And as we start to talk about lots of institutions using the cloud, somebody has to pay for the cloud. And if you don't have money sitting there to keep that bill, and if your credit card starts to hit zero, that cloud content goes away very quickly. And we're seeing that with a lot of the most recent websites, which are really making use of the cloud for storing their content. A subset of, kind of an offshoot of our Cyber Cemetery, as we were doing a lot of the crawling for these, we noticed that there are situations where there are large stores of content that are not really well indexed by a lot of the major search engines. And that can be speculated on why. It's really horrible web design, or they don't want it to be indexed, depending on which side of the fence you sit on. One great example is the BRAC Commission, the Defense Base Closure and Realignment Commission, which looks at base closures. They meet every 10 years. They produce a report. It's a lengthy 1,000-page document which says which bases we should close, which we should not. Well, in addition to that, there's usually about 1.2 million pages of supporting content, data sets, letters from all of the individuals of the various bases that they're looking at to help support the, writing in saying, please don't shut our base, or all of the various bases and military installations doing presentations on their impact with the national economy, the national defense, and what it would do. Just really great information. So as we were going through and harvesting this collection, we also went through and created metadata records for it and exposed it in a different way. And this one is one that before it was not on the web at all. It was one of the resources we call the deep web, or the hidden web. And by placing it into a curated digital library system, we're able to push that content out, and now we see 50 uses on this every day. And it just keeps going and going. And as time goes up and people start to take a look at it, and this one's 1.2 million files, pages of content, 14,000 objects, and there's actually about 1,000 data sets in this, which is just all of the data that they use to run their statistics that they included in the final reports. So a really interesting set. Some of the other publications that we've done, we've had researchers and faculty members from around the campus approach us and say, I represent such and such journal, whether it's the Chemical Information Society, whether it's a journal dealing with rhetoric. They come to us and say, is there any way you can help us place this online? And we go through the process of getting all the permissions that we need that allows UNT to have a non-exclusive license to publish this content in an open access manner. Then we digitize it and place it online. And an example is the JAC, which is a rhetoric journal. Various other things, the Miniature Book Society newsletters, we've digitized and have those online. We're moving a lot of the publications that are being created by UNT online into a much more permanent web accessible manner. Those are two right there. And then we're working with colleges, the College of Information, to place what was in this collection called the SLIS call number, which is now the College of Information call number, their back history of all of their newsletters online in a fully searchable manner so that you can provide even greater access to those. In addition to that, we're doing things that libraries should do, which is nice. We're digitizing the yearbooks. We've gone through, we recognize that this is a great resource, and we've digitized all the UNT yearbooks. Through the Portal of Texas History, we've also digitized 700 other yearbooks from institutions from around the state, which these provide a great glimpse into both academia, but then also provide a great resource for genealogists interested in looking at their ancestors and where they may have done their schooling. We're also starting to work with the NT Daily, which is the campus newspaper, and we've been working with them to bring in their born digital content. So all of the papers that were published from 2003 to the present, we're in the process of moving online. Currently, we have over 700 of those, roughly 7,000 pages, with another 2 years that are in the hopper. One of the really interesting things we'd love to be able to do is move back in time and go through and digitize the past 60 years of this newspaper. It would get used. One of the other big programs we have is the Texas Digital Newspaper Program, which is it's a group of libraries and archives around the state which are pushing for a standards-based approach to digitize historic newspapers, and honestly moving into born digital papers as well. Currently, this is by and large, our most used collection online. We get 1,500 plus uses a day on these collections. We've got over 500,000 pages of freely accessible newspapers, ranging from 1840s all the way to this last year, and all across the state of Texas. And these are all 66,000 issues that we make freely available to anyone interested in Texas. We also work really hard with allowing at the page level to be indexed by Google. So you can be searching along, doing your research in Google, and end up on a page of newspapers which has your search term, your relative, your fact that you're trying to find. We're working with the UNT Press, which reports up through the library, but they are taking a pretty innovative approach and going through and saying, we want to support open access too. So we have a number of publications. Currently, we've got, I believe it's 16 books that they've added to our repository and providing open access to, and then we're in the process of digitizing another 70 for them and moving on those online. And those will all be freely accessible. And then there's another set of content which they're going to make accessible to the UNT community, which would be the subset of, and if you have an EUID, you can have access to it. But really trying to push that forward. Another one that we're working extensively with is the Texas State Historical Association. We've worked with 2 of their publications, which previously had not been freely accessible in the same manner. The Texas Almanac, we digitized all of the Texas Almanacs going back, so we have all of that content online. And then we're providing one of the many instances of the Southwest Historical Quarterly. This is also available through JSTOR and other public or other commercial providers, but they've said open access is an important thing to them and to the UNT community, so they wanted to support the Portal of Texas History with providing this great resource online for all of our users. The 2 collections that I think hit home the most with open access at UNT, one is really that UNT Theses and Dissertations collection. UNT was actually one of the leaders in going with an ETD, electronic submission policy for theses and dissertations. It's had an interesting checkered past on campus that if you ever really want to know the history of ETDs, please talk to us. It's kind of cool. Not really. But now it's actually really in a really great state. We've got a great relationship with the graduate school, and we're working to try to meet the very interesting demands that are being placed on these publications from around campus. And the default policy for all of these publications is that they're open access. And this is one of our other collections that's heavily, heavily utilized. Over 1,500 uses a day. These are downloads a day. And when compared to the largest schools, this is way up there in the amount of usage that we're moving forward. We're also going through an experiment. So this covers from 1999 until the present. We're now taking a look at the process for digitizing the back issues and providing open access to a lot of those publications, which is a fairly significant undertaking. When you start to think there are 15,000 documents, we're looking at several million pages of content and quite a lengthy process. But it's something that we feel really is the library's role on a campus, is to push forward this content that we've been traditionally the stewards of and make it more readily available for not only our students and faculty, but for the wider community to discover the research that's being conducted here. And then finally, the UNT Scholarly Works, which is our unique view of an institutional repository. Whenever the Open Access Symposium happened last year, we recognized that we've got really robust digital infrastructure, but we didn't have a process for collecting things that were traditional in an institutional repository. So we spent some time and really did a literature review, talked with our peers, and really understood some of the challenges we were going to run into with interacting with faculty and staff and what models worked and what didn't. And so we kind of went through under the radar and started collecting content. We started internally. Then we went out to scholars and researchers throughout campus that we knew would work well with us and that didn't mind being the guinea pig. So the UNT Scholarly Works is the collection within the UNT Digital Library that we're promoting as the institutional repository for UNT. Currently, we have 425 items. It's a start with many more contributions kind of waiting in the queue to be processed. This represents work from 215 authors. So a pretty interesting sampling. And when you start there was discussion about the co-PI graphs and the visualizations. You can do the same things with co-authorship among these papers and start to identify various clusters of subjects. And then you get professors that really belong over there, but we don't have their content yet, so they get pulled over into this other group. So there's some really interesting things going with relationships around publishing. But still, it represents a very good sampling all to date. This is content from 8 colleges and centers from around campus, 19 different departments. So really just a small subset of what we hope to acquire over the next few years. But it's something we can really say we have a process, we have a method, and a couple slides back, the URL at the bottom, so basically the library website / repository will get you to a lot more information dealing with the process, what's accepted, what we're really interested in working with, and then as we come across things that we weren't expecting, we'll update our policies and really try to keep this a repository for all of the diverse scholarship that's happening at UNT. So a little bit about next steps. The first thing we want to do is really ramp up the content in UNT Scholarly Works. So far, we've had a wonderful graduate student working on this, but we recognize that the amount of possible content that could come from the university dwarfs the amount of effort that one person can give. So we really need to make sure that we scale up accordingly so that we can meet the needs of the university and not, give us all your data. Oh, we can't do anything with it yet. So that we can actually meet the needs. The other thing that we're looking at, and it was discussed here this morning, very timely, is we're seeing an increased need for an e-journal service on campus. Currently, we've got hard commitments from two groups on campus that they want a journal, two radically different kinds of journals, radically different expectations for what they're looking at as an open access journal. And then we've got, I think, there are 5 other groups that have also approached us with interest in this journal areas. And while a lot of the platforms that are available are absolutely easy to install and use, all of the librarians recognize it's not just technology, it's services built around that, it's training, it's helping them understand all of these fiddly things that we think are interesting and may not always be the prime things for all of our scholars to work with. So we're looking at how we scale out an e-journal service for the entire campus where the library acts as a service provider, not the editors, much like we were talking about this morning with the keynote. We've got some really interesting partnerships with researchers and research teams currently that are just almost there, but it would be unfair to really talk about them too much to show anything off. We've got some groups that are depositing large collections of images, which they view as the input for their further research. Just some really interesting projects, which by the end of this month or early next month, we'll start to have online. And we are trying to leverage the infrastructure and capacity we have within our repository and our ability to create metadata and standards and process and try to move that into the research community and help provide some of those services within our repository. This includes hosting of research data in a variety of contexts. Everybody's research data is different to everybody else. Your pile of images is somebody else's pile of research data. So, but we're really trying to understand what are the kinds of content, the challenges that we can step in and fill the needs for. We're also seeing quite a bit of reuse of this platform now. We have access for our researchers and our scholars to many millions of pages of text, early newspapers. We're seeing faculty members who are writing grants based on the content that's in the repository, and we really encourage that. We see, we've got a faculty member who's using the metadata for interesting research in machine translation of metadata records, and they're using the digital library systems as a primary data input for their research. We've got others that are really interested in all the log data. As we run these larger and larger systems, we're starting to get click data from millions and millions and millions of clicks. Last year we had, just looking at hits, we had over 30 million hits on just one portion of this site. That's a lot of data that you can let your algorithms go through and understand how users are interacting with this content. We're collecting a lot of usage data that can be used in a variety of ways. We're looking at usability studies. We're providing a platform for further research to be conducted on the content we're collecting. And this is a really exciting area for us and something we're interested in talking with faculty around the campus and even in other universities about how we can provide our data sets that we're creating just by running these operations. So finally, if there are any questions that you have, especially after this, please go ahead and email me or any of the folks in the Digital Libraries group, and we'd be glad to talk with you about projects, ideas, things we could do, things we could do better. Just let us know.
Any questions? And I know whatever question gets asked stands between the rest of you and lunch, but still, an opportunity to ask Mark anything.
Looks like lunch. Okay.
This is about getting faculty articles into the scholarly the repository. Do the faculty put the articles in, or does the library offer to do it? How is the recruitment and the ingestion handled?
So that's actually one of the things where when we start to talk to our peers, we see a bunch of different models have been tried. One that's pushed out there as the kind of the beginning of the open access movement is faculty will love this thing so much they'll want to self-submit all their content. And the groups that we've talked to said that won't work. We've tried it doesn't work at all. Another group that we looked at who we really respect, and they actually have tons of content. We said, well, how do you do that? And they said, well, we do what libraries have done historically. We've collected content, and we provided services on top of that, and we've moved it in. Now that means that's the library taking on a huge amount of work and effort, but one of the things that we see with both the institutional repository and then also that environmental policy collection, once you start getting your hands into that area, it becomes very obvious your next steps to start taking. And you know who the authors that you can go through and talk to. And with one well-placed email, we've had our Laura, who's been doing all of this work, she'll email one person and get 90 articles. And it's just like, well, that's good and bad, just one email. She'll email another person and say, I found these 3 articles. Would you be interested in submitting some others? And they say, sure, here's all the grant websites I've ever worked on, and there's a half dozen of those. Here's about 300 items. Have at it. So what we're trying to do is lower the bar for the faculty because, like has been said many times, everybody's busy. And we're viewing this as a service that the library should be providing. And with the amount of reuse we're starting to see with just in the early stages of the collections, it makes sense for us to be investing in that area.
One thing, Mark, that I didn't hear you say, maybe I missed it, just a little bit on the technical side of the library, digital library infrastructure. It's all based on open source tools, applications, and things that you've developed, correct? Do you want to talk just a little bit about that?
Sure. One of the things that we, we're either at the forefront or we're a little crazy for doing it ourselves is we've had to go through and develop a lot of these, a lot of this infrastructure ourselves. When we start to look at the types of services we're providing to the entire state of Texas with 150 plus partners who all want very different things, and we needed a platform that would allow us to scale both in content and the amount of access. When we started to look at a lot of the open source offerings, we found some serious gaps. So we went forward and developed a repository infrastructure based on a lot of these open source tools and methodologies, but it is really unique to the way that UNT expects to grow and to scale our content. We do have programmers and time devoted towards this. We also had someone that really wanted to architect a large system and was luckily given the opportunity to. And so far we're seeing that it's a fairly unique set of services that we're providing. One of the things that there was the discussion of open data, one of the things we're really trying to do is move into the range where we do have a platform that is unique to UNT, but we're trying to expose all of this content in as open a way as we possibly can. And a lot of the times we run into situations with licensing and things that aren't open access, but we still want to provide certain levels of services, non-consumptive services for the full text of the content. So we're developing APIs at the item levels. We've got open search literally open search APIs into our search systems, SRU support, OAI PMH. We're looking at other technologies, OAI ORE, which is the Object Reuse and Exchange Protocol. We're fully standards-based and standards compliant. All of this is built on very solid standards that are both used in the library community as well as the web community. And then it's just, there's some local engineering that we've done in order to build out these systems that scale.
Mark, assuming you have a working relationship with the UNT archives, would you just briefly describe how that works in working with the archives department?
The UNT archives, we've got actually many grants or many projects that we've done back and forth. We've had some really interesting situations where the UNT archives was approached with a deposit of content, and it was a hard drive. Here you go. And it was a photographer down in Dallas, and he donated his entire digital collection of photographs, and we worked with them to provide infrastructure for both the access to the content, but then also the preservation piece of that. We've got a grant currently working with some Civil War collections that they have that we're providing the technology support and the infrastructure to publish those online. In addition, we work with things that probably probably archives should be doing. We work with web archiving of the UNT domain. So twice a year we go through and harvest the entire unt.edu domain of content and store that in the archive for future use. And so we've been doing that since 2005, snapshotting all of the changes that have happened. And we started to get some reference requests of, I think that policy was different than it says it is now. And so being able to drill back down in history and look at that. There are probably many other examples. Oh, one of the things that's that was a nice side effect, when we digitized all of those, the yearbooks, that's one of the areas that there are a huge number of requests in the archives for is copies off of yearbooks and this person's mugshot when they came to the university. And by having those online, it's not only online so they don't have to flop them over on the scanner and make a copy, but also they're fully searchable. So it's easier for doing requests in those collections. But it's an area where there's even more I think we can do, and we're really excited to as we move forward to do more collaborative work with the UNT archives, with the special collections in general. Our music library, we've done a huge amount of work with digitizing both their rare documents as well as things that are unique to the university, such as all of the program books from the College of Music. And we're working with mounting the College of Music recordings online so that those are accessible in a much better way. Work with our Rare Books in Texana collection. We work heavily with our GovDocs collection. So we've been trying to work with a lot of groups, even locally within the library.
I'm just curious if when you've gone out to talk to faculty and have approached any that may be negative about it, and what they have said of maybe why they wouldn't put into, time, whatever. Do you have any comments on anyone that would be negative about it?
So we have two things. One, we haven't done a lot because literally, we've had a grad student work in this. Literally, that's all. And so one grad student's time is only so much. We've started to have discussions in the library like we would have outside, but we've not been able to really scale up to meet the demands that we see. And that's something we're going to be challenged with in the libraries in general. As we start to add more services to support new types of scholarship and new types of work, we're really going to have to take a look at what we currently provide access to and then do more with no more money. The other thing is it's all roses. Every time we talk about it, we love open access. And there are always questions. And a lot of the questions, if it's presented in a way where, if you know what you're talking about and you can actually show site examples and show that you've done the work behind it, those resolve pretty easily. And I can guarantee you, having a discussion with a group of librarians about this stuff is probably one of the hardest discussions you're going to have. They will nitpick everything, which is great. But it really makes you understand all of the challenges that you're going to run into. And I mean, some of this content is the lifeblood of the faculty and the researchers. And so we do have to be able to answer the questions correctly. And so I think we're learning how to do that. And hopefully over the next year, we'll really have a much better methodology and really a script for how we interact with the faculty.
You know, I'll kick into that, comment that I have no doubt that out there in our faculty, there are people that are going to be absolutely opposed to it. But for every one of those, there's probably 100 that are like, let's go. We're ready to do it. I mean, we're seeing that in the responses that we've gotten so far.
Mm-hmm. And so far, we've been actually a little bit hesitant on really publicizing the work we've done because we don't want we've been asking for it, people give it to you, and you're not able to meet the expectations. So making sure that we do this in a well thought out process that doesn't make us look bad.
We need to scale up our services.
Exactly. All right.
Well, please join me in thanking Mark. Okay, we have lunch for you over on the side. Please avail yourself of the food that we've prepared for you, and also we've got about an hour for you to eat and socialize before the next set of sessions kick off. We will start promptly at 1:30 though, so have at it now. Thank you.